And a very good day to you. We start this hour in the Middle East. The backlash and protests after Saudi Arabia executed 47 people accused of terror acts. Among those killed, this man, Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr. He was a Shiite cleric and very critical of the Saudi monarchy. Some of the sharpest reaction comes from that nation's regional rival, Iran. On Saturday, crowds in Tehran protested at the Saudi embassy there. You can see some demonstrators after they broke into the embassy. Some 40 people were arrested there. And then there's this photo. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, compares Saudi Arabia to ISIS there, saying that both execute those who oppose them. And then from Iraq, top leaders there are showing their disagreement. Iraqi Vice President Nouri al-Maliki says the execution will, quote, topple the Saudi regime. Following all of this, our Becky Anderson, who is live in Abu Dhabi with the very latest. Becky, good to have you with us. What more are you hearing?
Cue me. All right. Well, the execution of the Saudi Shia cleric Nimr al-Nimr is a multi-layered story, George, with wide-ranging ramifications. On the personal level, it is the story of an outspoken cleric. To really understand these ramifications of the execution of Saudi Shia cleric Nimr al-Nimr, it's tough. The execution, as I say, along with 40 other people or 46 other people in a single day, a story which as I say, you know, cannot be overestimated. A vocal critic of the ruling monarchy in Saudi Arabia, which is a majority Sunni nation. Al-Nimr was especially critical during the Arab Spring-inspired protests back in 2011, when thousands of Saudis in the eastern part of the country took to the streets to demand greater freedoms and more economic opportunities. Following al-Nimr's arrest in 2012, there were demonstrations that led to violence and to deaths. Now, on Saturday, video footage showed dozens of protesters taken to the streets in the eastern part of the country, chanting against the monarchy, which is extremely rare, as you know, in Saudi. There's also been a diplomatic backlash across this region, George. Iran strongly condemning the execution of al-Nimr. George?
Just to talk, Becky, a bit more, talk to us, if you could, just about the implication, given that this happened, when it comes to finding more stability in the region. How important, how
yeah, well, the impact will definitely be felt in places like Yemen and in Iran, and in Syria, where Iran and Saudi Arabia, of course, are locked in this proxy competition for power and for influence. Remember, only recently the two countries did finally agree to sit across the same table in Geneva to talk about the possibility of peace there. But will they now be able to do that? Well, that is a very, very big question. And we're also watching for and listening out for any concerns across the Gulf region as a whole, a relatively restive Shia population. In Bahrain, for example, we've seen demonstrations there against activity by Saudi in the past. So, yeah, the impact at this point, one that we really need to watch for. George?
Becky Anderson, live in Abu Dhabi, to give us your reporting there and your expertise from the region. Becky, thank you so much for your time today. Let's press further on this and the diplomatic fallout from this mass execution. I'm joined now by Christopher Dickey. He is the world news editor for the Daily Beast. Christopher, good to have you with us. So, look, when you look at what happened in Tehran with the protests at the Saudi embassy, when you consider the reaction from that nation's supreme leader, where do things go now between these two regional rivals?
Well, I think we also have to ask, where does it go for Europe and the United States, who are caught up in this mess, where we're really looking at not only two religious rivals, but two theocracies: Iran, a theocratic republic; Saudi Arabia, a theocratic monarchy, both of whom say God's on their side. Is that something that the United States should get in the middle of? And in fact, it is something the United States is in the middle of right now. Then you add to that the problem of the so-called Islamic State saying, no, God is on our side, and all of them executing people, beheading people. The Iranians don't behead them, they hang them. But basically, it is a bloody theocratic mess in the Middle East, and it's only going to get worse as these different factions try to fight it out.
I want to talk about Saudi Arabia claiming that those who were executed were involved in, as they describe it, terror acts. And critics will point out, they say instead that they believe the people who were executed instead paid the ultimate price for speaking out against the monarchy. What are your thoughts?
Well, look, a lot of the people who were executed, a lot of the 47 people beheaded on the 2nd, were people who were involved with al-Qaeda and with attacks in Saudi Arabia almost 10 years ago or more, who have been rotting in Saudi jails and basically just waiting for this to happen. In the case of Nimr al-Nimr, the Shiite sheikh, or Ayatollah, some say, you know, he was not involved in that kind of violence or subversion. And this is an absolute affront to Iran, which clearly the Saudis knew it would be. You know, the problem here, too, is that the person who's most responsible for this is the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Nayef, who is very close to the Americans. He was running counterterrorism operations for Saudi Arabia and deeply in bed with the Americans in those efforts.
Christopher, I want to talk also about the proxy wars. So, you know, we understand, as you mentioned, you know, many of the 47 involved, according to Saudi Arabia, in terror acts. But when it came to the death of Nimr al-Nimr, this is something that has caused a great deal of reaction. And when it comes to the proxy wars, to what we see in Yemen, what we see in Syria, how does this affect any efforts to find stability on those fronts?
Well, it makes it infinitely more difficult. And basically, if we are going to extricate Syria from the mess it's in, or try to, we have to have much better coordination among a whole array of different countries and interests. You've got the Russians and the Iranians on one side, the Americans sort of on the same side as the Saudis on the other. You've got the Turks playing a complicated game there, the Qataris as well. There's a wild proxy conflict of shifting sides in Syria. Trying to calm that down, trying to get everybody working in the same direction of establishing peace there and ending slaughter that's killed more than 200,000 people and driven millions of refugees out of the country and a lot of them into Europe. All that takes cooperation. This kind of thing absolutely militates against cooperation and, in fact, creates more reasons for these various proxy forces to continue using the Syrian battleground to try and kill their rivals' proxies.
Christopher Dickey joining us live via Skype from Paris. Christopher, thank you so much for your insight on this situation. And when it came, of course, sir, thank you. And when it came to Yemen, as Christopher mentioned, and the proxy war there, a ceasefire between the Saudi-led coalition and Houthi rebels in Yemen has now ended. That ceasefire started back in December alongside peace talks sponsored by the United Nations. Saudi Arabia's state news agency said the rebels violated the truce several times there. The Houthi-run news agency blamed what it calls Saudi aggression for recent violence. Almost 6,000 people have been killed in the fighting since March.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.